What is the biggest financial transaction we will ever undertake? Small business owners are the engine of our economy. Like, business owners are being attacked from all sides. So even though we don't have the knowledge around the tools, we have opinions about the tools. I saw how the past was limiting me, and it's like that for everybody.
Mike, you've been a CPA for over 30 years, working closely with owner-managed businesses. Before we get into strategy, I want to talk about your journey. There's a powerful moment where everything changed for you. What happened that night in Medicine Hat?
So I was sitting in my office in Medicine Hat in the fall of 2016. My wife and I had kids, and I was staring at a new busy season coming up. And I was sitting in my office and I'm like, I'm not happy. The big difference here is that I recognized that I'd felt that feeling before. And when I look back at the other situation I was in as to the current situation, I realized there was only one constant, and that was me. Could I be the reason that I'm not enjoying the work that I was doing inside my firm? And when I looked at that more and I started to think about it more, I actually ended up hiring a coach. That coach kind of helped me look at my situation differently, helped me have some conversations that I wasn't used to having. And then eventually I decided that I did not want to be in this business any longer. And I made the move to become a financial advisor.
You teach something called the 3 conversations. Can you walk us through that idea a little bit?
Yeah, so in the process of becoming a financial advisor, I've realized that we're always in 3 different conversations. The first conversation is the me-to-me conversation, and that's a conversation that we have with ourselves. That's that voice in our head that we might recognize. You know, you're in a situation, you're scared, something happens to you, and there's an internal narrative trying to interpret what's going on in that situation. So we call that the me-to-me conversation. The me-to-you conversation is the conversation that we have together. Now, ideally, to have a really great me-to-you conversation, we don't want to be in the me-to-me conversation because we can't have 2 conversations at once. You can try, but it doesn't work very well. That's when you'll notice that people are distracted. That's when people are waiting for their opportunity to say something. Like, for instance, we'll be in a conversation and you'll tell me about your vacation in Disneyland. And now all I'm thinking about is all the times I've been to Disneyland, and I can't wait to insert what I have to have. Well, that's not a conversation, right? That's just listening for a moment to speak, right? And then the you to you conversation is the opposite, is when you're in your head. Is when the other person's sitting there thinking about something that you've said or a topic that you've raised in a meeting. And it's really important when someone's in the you to you conversation is just to stop, relax, pause, let them collect themselves and just say, hey, did what I just say kind of make sense? Would you like me to go over that again? You have to bring them back because they're in another world, and that's in their head. So it's really important, that context of those 3 conversations, because it helps us in really listening to what people want and having a conversation that matters for them.
How does someone recognize the voice in their head, and why do you say it's not them?
That's the rub. Most people, I don't think, realize that there's a voice there, or they don't distinguish it. Now, the way that I like to look at the word distinguish means to see, to finally see. And a great example is looking up in the sky and remembering when your parents may have pointed out the Little Dipper or the Big Dipper. When you looked up into the sky, all you saw were stars. And until someone distinguished that, you couldn't see it. And so most people don't understand that voice in their head. And I really didn't understand that voice in my head until I was in my mid-50s. And it's really important because that voice in our head is part of us, but it's not all of us. Because in most situations, if you can recognize the voice in your head as, what was the guy, Eckhart Tolle said in The Power of Now, is there one me or are there 2 me's? And actually in most of us, there's an observer that can see that conversation happening. And so I always say thinking is thoughts about thoughts, right? Because thoughts that we have in our head are random. They come from here, they come from there. They could be brought up by a song or being in a new place that you recognize. And so that voice in your head is part of you, but it's not all of you. And it's really important for people to recognize is that that voice in your head is primarily wired for survival. And we're not merely meant to survive, we're meant to thrive. And so I think that it's a powerful distinction, but most people haven't made that distinction for themselves.
Taking out one of those conversations, the me to me conversation, why is it that you feel that impacts every financial decision?
Well, we have a narrative on everything, right? Now, whether that narrative is built on a foundation of knowledge is debatable. Okay, maybe that's a great way of saying it. So we have an idea or we have an opinion. The way that I like to say is we have opinions. We live in a sea of an opinion. And even though we have an idea about something like right now politics and what's going on in the world are very front of mind and we have opinions about it. But we have no idea, like, not to use a controversial subject, but like climate change, right? Like that's a big, complex conversation, but yet we have an opinion. And so what happens is people have opinions around financial matters, even if they don't have a lot of knowledge around financial matters. And those opinions can be developed through childhood. They might have saw their parents arguing about money. Their parents may have said something like, all debt is bad. There was a really great study that showed that people who came from a lower economic demographic actually had a harder time achieving financial success because of, by inference, they were in that environment. So even though we don't have the knowledge around the tools, we have opinions about the tools. And so those opinions, because again, we can't discern whether or not those opinions are factual or whether they're emotional, guide us. And sometimes it's invisible. It's like an invisible hand that's stopping you from doing something. Or it's another hand that's telling you to do something that may not be good for you, right? As humans, we're wired to consume. And so that's what makes it really, really hard for people to build wealth for the long term, because at some point in time, we're all going to need money to live.
When you're talking about the past, you're known to say, your past is information, not your destiny.
Yeah.
How have you seen that to be true?
Well, I've seen it in my own life. I've come from a bit of a difficult past. My father had some issues with alcohol, and I became a bit of a people pleaser. And then when I had this awareness about how I controlled my situation and how I determined the level of happiness that I have in my life, I saw how the past was limiting me. And it's like that for everybody. All we can do is we can just look at it, and we can look at it as information. And to give you a kind of an interesting story is that my father and I were estranged for a long period of time. And he could always be there for me in the bad times because he could help me. And that made him feel really good to be able to help me. It was really hard for him to be there in the good times. I became a chartered accountant, which is now a sort of chartered professional accountant. I had all these awards. It was really hard for him because he had a lot of shame in his life. So we were estranged. And so he passed away, and there's a story around him being there, and he knew that his time was limited, and he was talking to us about how sorry he was about all these things, and we were having these stories, and we were laughing. I was with my brother, and I realized that at that moment, I'd lost 20 years with my dad because I couldn't accept him for who he was. And so what I did is I actually wrote a letter to my dad when he was gone, and I told him that I recognized, what was going on and the reasons that I had difficulty in relating to him, and who he is for me today has changed. And so what I say, and what a lot of if people might find it hard to understand, but you can actually rewrite your past, because your past is a story. Your past is an interpretation of facts, and those facts can be interpreted many, many other ways. And so I help people, celebrate the parts of their past that they enjoy and they're proud of, and help them overcome those limiting beliefs so that they can actually plan and dream and set new goals for a future that really excites them.
When we're talking about quieting that internal me-to-me conversation, you talk a lot about competence. How do you see that tying in?
So I'm in the business of financial advisory and helping people with their finances. And competence quiets that voice because I can stand in knowing the information and I'm not nervous about the information. It's like, let's just say I was selling cars and I didn't know anything about the car. Well, I would be sitting here talking to you about your car, and because we've all driven a car, we know about cars, but I'm gonna wow, they're gonna ask me a question that I don't know, and that's gonna be in the back of my mind until eventually they are gonna ask me a question that I don't know. And so if I've read the manual, if I've taken the time to really understand the vehicle, sure, there will be a few questions that I may not know, but I'll be able to sit there and know I know this information inside and out. And so that voice in your head will not be sitting there, and because we all want to look good. And so we're trying to avoid not looking good by having that voice go over and over in our heads, and it's not helping us, actually, it's hurting us.
What do you mean when you say people live inside these agreements about money in their own heads, talking to themselves?
Yeah, so people have ideas about money. And we don't have a lot of education around money in our school system. We don't have a lot of education around our money in other parts in university or other types of academic adventures. So a lot of those ideas around money are manufactured. They're manufactured through advertising. They're manufactured through stories that our friends tell us. They're actually stories that we see our parents live out in front of us. And those ideas are RSPs are great. They're the best savings plan. They're a savings plan. They're not a pension plan. RSPs are great. All debt is bad. TFSAs are a scam. Insurance salesmen are crooks. There's all these things ideas that people have in their head around financial matters. And really, that gets in their way when we try to have a conversation around financial matters. Because the way that I look at the world is that I'm agnostic on tools. An RSP, a TFSA, insurance, other investments, private investments. It's like comparing shovels. Is a garden shovel different than a spade, right? They're different. They're used for different reasons. And so those agreements that people have are a real stumbling block in them being open to conversations about other tools that could really help them.
As an advisor, how can you recognize when someone you're working with has gone inside on one of these conversations?
Yeah, they get real quiet, and you can see they're distracted. They might be looking away, and those are the telltale signs. It's like any conversation. You can tell when someone's sitting there and they're in the conversation with you. And there is something beautiful about being in a conversation with somebody. And to be honest with you, you can create so much connection and be of service to someone else when you're in a real conversation, because it doesn't happen very often. Most of us are waiting for our time to talk, and most of us aren't listening. And so it's pretty easy to see when somebody's having a conversation with themselves.
Is there a phrase that you use when you're trying to snap someone out of that internal conversation?
Yeah, I just pause and I say, hey, does what I just said make sense? Do you want me to go over that again with you? Would you like to take a break? There's some things like that. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring people back into the conversation. And hopefully whatever they were thinking about, we can talk about, because that might be a clue as to one of those stumbling blocks that they have towards being able to open up to other ideas and other possibilities for their financial situation.
You get a little more technical in your approach here and a little more practical when we're looking at the me to you conversations.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what the Vince Dodona's narrative tools and technical model is and how you use that?
Vince, who's a mentor of mine, I've got a big man crush on Vince. is he talks about narrative, tools, and technical, right? And when you're talking to a financial advisor, I really recommend that you interview financial advisors, you ask them questions, because frankly, the financial advisor is the expert. And what happens is in a lot of financial advisory advertisements and things that happen is people focus too much on the tools. So they might focus on financial plans, they might focus on, insurance illustrations, and the tools are not the narrative. The narrative is the why. Why am I doing this? Where am I trying to go? Looking at what would happen if we changed the interest rate from 3% to 4%. Yes, I'll tell you what's going to happen. The results will change. I always say to people in their financial plans, the only thing that's sure about your financial plan, it's wrong. The numbers are going to be higher or they're going to be lower. But what I'm trying to do to create for people is a North Star. And I find a lot of us have lost that North Star in our lives. I'm a father. I've got 3 kids, and they're all teenagers. And there was a time in our lives that my wife and I, probably a period of 10 years, where I call it, we floated down the river of life. And anywhere we got to was fine because that's just where we were at. But when we woke up from that period, we needed to seek for our own North Star in our lives because we want to move somewhere. And it's the journey in life that's everything for people. It's not getting things, it's not, it's the experiences, it's the struggles, it's the relief and happiness after the struggles, it's the milestones, it's the graduations, right? It's the birthdays, it's the anniversaries. Like, those are the things that people value. We need to get focused on the narrative because I'm the expert and I'm there for you. And if you've done your due diligence and we've worked through and we've asked the right questions, you'll understand that I'm the expert. We can talk about the tools, but the tools should only support the narrative. And the narrative should be about you and your life and where you want to go. And that's what I'm up to, is I'm there helping people recreate a dream for themselves that they can fulfill, and we can align their financial matters to achieve that.
What are 3 drivers behind every financial decision?
Every decision or choice for people on a financial matter is based on an obligation, a threat, or an opportunity. Okay, so how Vince likes to say it is the fulfillment of an obligation, the exploitation of an opportunity, or the avoidance of a threat. And so if you think about it, when you're looking at, I'll deal with a business owner and I'm showing them what their estate taxes are going to look like when their shares are disposed upon them passing. Well, writing that big check to the Canada Revenue Agency is, to some people, it's a threat. And so that may be the reason why they decide to do something for us to deal with that issue. With family farms, we deal with family farms in 2nd, 3rd generation, and for them, it's an obligation to take care of their family from the farm. They never want to sell the land, and so they have an obligation in farm transition for some form of fairness. Now, equal is not fair and fair is not equal. Other situations with business owners, when we can use some financial tools that help saving taxes, well, that's a real opportunity. But most choices come down to obligation, threat, or opportunity. And that's really what I listen for, and I try to help people move through that.
As an advisor, how do you take a client from confusion to clarity?
Generally, I have a series of meetings that I have with all my clients, and sometimes they become friends, right? We don't start off as friends, or sometimes we do become friends, but my job is not to be their friend. My job is there just to help them with their financial matters. And so I like to go through basically 3 meetings. And so my first meeting is, so what? And I'm like, okay, why are we here, right? What are the matters that are of interest for the client that they're trying to solve for, okay? And so when we go through the so what conversation, we talk about that and we come to some agreement around what it is of concern and whether or not I can assist with that. If we decide to move forward, then I have another conversation which is called the rest of the story. And in the rest of the story, we take the things that mattered and then we really backfill what really the details behind it. And then we also do some financial information, right? Do some financial disclosure. And then in the third meeting, we have the show me meeting, and where we sit down and we show them some solutions and some ideas around how they can improve their financial situation. And that's generally the process. Now, again, ideally, it happens in 3 meetings. It doesn't always happen in 3 meetings. It actually rarely happens in 3 meetings, right? And what we need to do is in my practice, is I really want to be of service, and sometimes we're not a good fit. I'm doing a better job at recognizing that these days, and just saying, hey, you know, I might not be the right person to help you with your situation. So sometimes confusion ends in confusion. Sometimes confusion ends in some type of solution and some type of, you know, completion around that issue if we're able to move through it, right? But there's a lot of factors that are involved in that.
As co-author of Blind Spots, fantastic read for anyone that hasn't heard it yet. In your book, Financial Blind Spots, you talk about a massive shift from pensions to saving plans. So why do you call the RRSP and the TFSA landscape a blind spot?
I think it's very widely known that the only, how shall I say, boilerplate pensions these days are with government officials or public companies. Whereas, you know, again, pensions used to be a way that companies could take care of long-time employees. We have a lot more movement these days in terms of employment. Lots of people don't stay with jobs. And so they've been phased out, and their replacement has been what we call a registered retirement savings plan, and, you know, a tax-free savings account, right? Now, lots of people look at these as pensions. They're not pensions. They are savings plans, okay? So you're actually saving money to provide your own pension. And as I say a lot, we're wired to consume. And so having a pension that's taken off your check, where a third-party manager is managing the money, and ideally it's a defined benefit, you have this asset that's just waiting for you to retire. When you get to your 85 factor, or whether you attain some type of age or level of service, you get the money. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. And that is a huge issue, because people are saving, but they're not saving enough. And so people are having a lot of uncertainty around money later in life. And that's why it's really, really made it imperative for financial advisors and planners to really help people with that conversation and help them prepare for the future that they're trying to save for, or try to build wealth towards, because there's a great tool called a pension that just isn't there for most people anymore.
How does this shift create anxiety and confusion in the people you work with?
Or we talk about a lot the fact that we do not get proper education around financial matters and money in school. And so most people, I don't think understand what a pension is, right? And how a pension works, and how it translates into money into the future, right? And so people are scared. And what do people do when they're scared? They avoid situations. And for a lot of us, we think that day is never going to come. And there's a guy by the name of Paul Adams who put out this question that I thought was so brilliant. What is the biggest financial transaction we will ever undertake, and who is it with? And it's with your financial self. It's with yourself in the future. And we're all going to show up 30, 40 years down the road, and we're going to talk to our future selves, and our future self's going to be sitting there saying, hey, where's the money? You've got this big IOU or this big promissory note, and you're going to say, I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't mean for it to work out this way, but that's the way it worked out. And I'm having so many of those conversations with people in their later lives, and it's heartbreaking.
Why does having more products lead to worse outcomes for clients?
You know, within the TikTok videos and with social media, there's so many people that are out there, so-called financial experts. And and I had a friend of mine describe this, which was great. In these situations where you have this so-called financial expert that is talking to you about this so-called magic pill that is going to solve all your financial problems, there's something happens. You, the client, start out with the money, and they have the information. And what happens in that transaction? You change places. You've got the information, and they have your money. Are you financially better off? And I would say in most cases you're not, because there is no magic pill, right? You need to build a team of professionals around you, and you need to learn the tools. And you know what the best tool is? The one that you're going to use.
One of your focuses is owner-managed businesses. What makes them unique?
Owner-managed businesses are basically small business owners. And so what they've done in a lot of cases, these are people who are really good at what they do, and they're so good that they've gone out and they've started a business, okay? And why they're a little bit different is because it takes a lot of courage to start a business, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of businesses fail. So there's a different mindset to owner-managed businesses, and there's more complexity, and there's more issues, and that actually leans into my training as a CPA and a business owner myself, right? And small business owners are the engine of our society, which people I don't necessarily understand. And that's why they're targeted so much by the Canada Revenue Agency. And so they're taxed to death. They have to deal with staffing and employees. They have to deal with cash flow uncertainty. They have issues with building capital. They're under-leveraged in a lot of cases in terms of their time and their resources and their actual capital. And they are the heart of our economy. And so, they're the unsung heroes out there for us. And it just happens to match with my heart and also my training and my experience to help owner-managed businesses.
Why do you say business owners are alone?
Because they are. Business owners have generally a whole team around them, okay? And so that team could be the accountant, it could be the lawyer, it could be the investment manager, it could be the insurance guy or gal, and they have a whole team around them. But seldom do they have someone on that team that's taking the lead to bring it all together for a business owner. And so a business owner is not only trying to provide leadership to his staff and his senior level employees so that they can provide the leadership to the rest of the staff, and also provide the capital and the cash flow to keep the business going. And they're also getting this segmented advice. The accountant is talking about the taxes, the lawyer is talking about making agreements legal, the investment advisor is talking about the investments, the insurance guy is talking about, or gal is talking about the insurance, and no one's bringing it together for them. And so they do feel truly alone. The business owner can't go to the employees and share the things that they're scared about, because the employees are going to say, I better find another job, because the person who's supposed to be signing my paycheck seems pretty uncertain about what's going on right now. So they are truly caught in a place where they're alone with their thoughts, they're alone with their ideas. And so that provides a great opportunity for professionals, whether it's your accountant or it's your lawyer or whether it's your financial advisor like me, to really provide that way to pull all these professionals together and really get a great result for the owner manager. And it's actually been really the backbone of my business, is being able to do that, and what's created a lot of the success. And it's something that's very, very needed, because like I said, the small business owners are the engine of our economy.
What's the danger for small business owners if they remain fragmented like this until death or divorce?
Yeah, they're just going to go out of business, is what's going to happen. Like most small businesses don't make it to 8 years. And so lots of times when we're trying to work with businesses and that, we're trying to actually understand the facts and the statistics around where they're at, what their sales are, where they're growing, where the bottlenecks are, to determine if we can help them. They're just going to have much more difficulties in running their business. And I don't really know what to say, right? I've had so many conversations where they're not getting good tax advice. They're not getting good advice, and it's not necessarily the provider's problem or their problem. Sometimes we outgrow our professionals, and most financial professionals are referred within 2 degrees of separation, which means that's a friend or a friend of a friend. Now, that's a good way to establish trust. Hey, they're a good person. Hey, they're friendly. Hey, they're good to deal with. But is that friend of yours really able to make the recommendation based upon their professional qualifications? Well, maybe if your friend's an accountant and they're referring to another accountant, that would be kind of weird, because maybe, your friend would probably recommend themselves, but they don't have the basis to assess the qualifications of that person, right? It's a real issue.
How have the rising taxes and the workforce problems and the costs changed the landscape for business owners?
Like, business owners are being attacked from all sides. Back in, I want to say 2015, 2016, with the new Liberal government headed by Justin Trudeau, they actually provided a whole bunch more resources to the Canada Revenue Agency, and they came up with a whole bunch more taxes for them to deal with. Now, right now, we're not going to talk about the morality of taxes, whether we should be paying taxes, whether we shouldn't be paying taxes, because that's a whole can of worms, right? And what they instituted were a few rules, right? One of the rules are the taxes on split income. Before, business owners, if their spouse was a shareholder, they could, dividend money to their spouse. They could, within reason, pay salary to their spouse. Well, now that's made it very, very difficult because of the amount of activity and actions required to actually split income. And well, what does that mean? Well, it means in our progressive tax system, if one spouse makes $100,000 and the other spouse makes $100,000, they're in the same tax bracket. If one spouse makes $200,000 and the other spouse makes zero, they're in a high tax bracket, and they will end up actually spending more money on taxes, yet they're in the same financial situation. Being able to split income, which is something that they do in the United States, because they actually tax on a family basis, like they file jointly. Husbands and wives file jointly in the United States, right, which overcomes that issue. Okay, so that's one issue. The other issue is that what business owners have done for a long time is they use active income, which is taxed at a lower rate, and they dividend that income to a holding company, and then they use that for investment. And what that does is actually creates a deferral, because the small business owner tax rates, let's just say for sake of ease, are 10%. Well, if you're pulling out money at 30, 40%, well now, like personally, now you've got a 20 to 30% advantage sitting in your holding company, and you can invest that money in the future, and you can build it up before you actually have to pay the taxes. So it's called a deferral. Well, now what the government has said, okay, well, you can do that, but when you have too much inactive income, you lose your small business deduction. So now you go from an easy rate of 10% to 25% if you have too much passive income. So all these factors have made it very, very difficult for the business owner, because there's been a whole bunch of additional layers of tax that have been added onto them. And plus, the progressive rates keep going up, which is, another issue. And also the integration between salary and dividends has changed as well. Now, dividends are a distribution from a company. And so technically dividends, when you receive a dividend, those dividends would be taxed twice, because a dividend is a distribution from a company after it's paid taxes. So the company pays tax, and then it sends a dividend to you, and then you pay tax. So technically it's taxed twice. So that's why dividends are taxed lower. But every so often, the government kind of messes around with the integration. And so ideally, whether you pay a salary or you pay a dividend, your tax as an individual should be the same, but it's not. Actually, now it's actually higher if you take the dividend. So now you've got to leave the money in the company for a longer period of time for that deferral to work out for you. These are all factors that business owners are dealing with, and it's made it very, very difficult for them.
You're very clear on who it is that you're here to work with and who you're here to serve. Can you share what your ideal client profile looks like and why does this clarity matter to you?
I actually like a framework that was from Burt Baccarat in his book. And there's basically 5 types of clients, okay? There's the great client. Now, the great client shows up every time, has all their information, is eager and enthusiastic to be in the meeting. That's a great client. And so a great client isn't necessarily framed by financial metrics. Now, there's a sometimes worth helping client. The sometimes worth helping client shows up, sometimes they're a little bit late, they don't always show up, they don't always have all their information. However, with a little bit of time and a little bit of coaching, they can become a great client. Then there's the fun client. The fun client is always fun, they're talking about the things that they do, and sometimes it's a little overstated and is very exuberant and the rest of it. A lot of times the fun client just doesn't bring their stuff, doesn't answer all the questions, and again, they can become a great client if they would just kind of wake up. The next client is the use you for information client. And that client will sit there and ask you a whole bunch of questions and dive into all the technical and the details and the rest of it, and ultimately they're probably looking for another provider or they're looking for another solution, they're looking to do it on their own. I'm not judging people why they do that. However, that's not a really good use of my time, it's not a good use of their time. And then there are clients that will never trust you. So really I seek to help the clients in the first 3 categories. I have great clients, I have sometimes worth helping clients, and I have fun clients. Also, I would like them to fit inside of my framework for my ideal client. And the reason for that is that the biggest cost to all of us is time. We're not getting any more back. There's a limit to how many people that I can serve in my lifetime, and I really want to serve as many people as I can inside of a framework that can give the most results to our society. Like I find that, wealth is not good or bad. Money can transform the world from a good perspective and for a not so good perspective. And I tend to believe it can transform for the better if we're dealing with the right people. And so that's why I really want to stay inside of my framework and with people who want to participate, and want to engage in a conversation that's going to allow them to create a better future for themselves.
Why do you feel every advisor should say no a little more often?
There's a great saying that if you do not have integrity with the word no, you do not have integrity with the word yes. So if you can't say no, then you're saying yes all the time, and then you're probably not going to fulfill on your yes. Having boundaries in any area, whether it's your work, whether it's your family situation or your business, is very important. So there are times we need to say no.
Your principles are very clear and very different. Something that you talk about is Dan Sullivan's 4 freedoms. How do these guide your financial planning?
I love Dan Sullivan's 4 freedoms. And the 4 freedoms are freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationship, and freedom of purpose. Freedom of time is pretty obvious, right? You can do whatever you want with your time, right? Freedom of money is that money is no longer a constraint for you, okay? Freedom of purpose means that you can actually pursue the things in life that give you the most passion, give you the most energy, and give yourself the most fulfillment. And freedom of relationship is in the same vein. You're just able to deal with or be in community with the people that you want to be in community with. So if you're stuck in a job and you really don't like your coworkers and you don't like your boss, well, you don't have freedom of relationship because you're engaged in relationships that you're just maybe not enjoying. Like I find that most people want freedom, and really that freedom is freedom of time. And that freedom is to do what you want, with who you want, when you want, and how you want. it's challenging to have freedom of time until you have freedom of money. And then that's really my job, is to help people have freedom of money. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean having more money. That could mean downsizing. That could mean restructuring your finances or your vision for the future that's a little bit different. You know, there are people in this world that have a heck of a lot less than us that have freedom of money. You know, they're not fixated on the next iPhone or the next car that's coming out there, right? So, you know, again, freedom of money doesn't necessarily mean more. It means, what is your relationship with money? And that's what I really work hard to understand, what people's relationship with money is, so that we can help them towards, again, building a life and a future that they want.
Something that you say is the biggest financial transaction is with your future self. Can you explain how that ties in?
Yeah. Like Paul Adams, who's a person that I deal with inside of my advisor network, posed that question: what's the most significant financial transaction you'll make, and who is it with? And it's your future self. And when I heard that, it almost knocked me to the ground, because it is so true that I see people show up every day and they're like, I never thought it was going to look like this. Now, how could you? How could you know exactly how the future? So I help people get off the hook with that question. You know, I'm like, how could you know, right? Having said that, though, we don't want to show up in the future for a whole bunch of hopes and dreams that for our future selves that we could not fulfill on, because we just didn't take action earlier in life to put some things in place that would create a possibility for that life. So that's what I mean, and it is so true, unfortunately, in some situations.
Why do you feel that people misunderstand retirement as being put out of service?
The definition of retirement is put out of service. And I don't think anyone wants to be put out of service. And I can give you a good story. A friend of mine who's a teacher was facing retirement. The R word is what I call it. And he said, geez, you know, I'm retiring and I need to stop working and I'm really anxious about this. And I'm like, well, then don't retire. He's like, what? Yeah, don't retire. Do something else. He's like, that's brilliant. And so now he's a trustee for the school division. He also works giving services for memorial events when people pass. He's actually a celebrant, and he lives this active life outside. He is retired from teaching, and he has a pension, but he has his side gig that gives him a ton of fulfillment because he's out there in the world spending time with people. It's also not grinding on his retirement resources, because he's got this side gig that gives him a little side hustle that gives him some money that really does help his cash flow situation, and he's happy. And he still points to that conversation as being transformative for him, you know, years ago. So I don't like the R word. I say yes, but you're moving to another form of service. Like, we're never out of service. We're always in service, whether it's our service to our family, our communities. We always want to be in service.
Can you explain the mountain metaphor and how you pack going up determines how you come back down?
Yeah, so this was something that was given to me by a mentor, Dean Harder, another man crush. He talks about this metaphor of, you know, wealth accumulation as being a mountain. And for most people, it does feel like climbing a mountain, you know, and what he talks about is how you pack going up the mountain determines how you come down the mountain. You know, again, to throw in some of these crazy metaphors that we say is that where do most of the accidents on Everest happen? Coming down the mountain, not going up the mountain, right? And so what he means by that is that the financial tools and your perspective about what's enough, what you want to do in the future determines how you decumulate. So we talk about accumulation going up, decumulation coming down, right? And so we find that for most clients and customers that using that mountain metaphor really helps them visualize kind of the exercise that we're doing when we're talking about building their wealth and being prepared for that time when they want to do something else. They want to be what I like to call work optional.
You're well known for reframing insurance as a planning tool and not as a product. Why is permanent insurance misunderstood, do you think?
Oh boy, that's a big one. Permanent insurance is always been a bit of a black box for people. It's become much more popular now with things like TikTok and people calling permanent insurance cash value insurance and cash value life insurance. And, so it's become more, how shall I say, fashionable these days. Now, these products go back over 100 years. Like these insurance products go back over 100 years. What's happened, like any other financial tool, has been subject to a lot of different opinions, a lot of different ideas around it. I think to properly understand the issue, there's two factors. Number one is the factor about how insurance is sold. So I don't know if hopefully some of our viewers look at the movie Groundhog Day, and there's this guy that showed up for Bill Murray, and his name was Needle Nose Ned, and he ran across the town square to introduce himself, and he was an insurance advisor, right? That's our picture of an insurance advisor. How insurance has been sold through the agency model. There's, everybody knows an insurance salesman, and that has lowered the perception of insurance and how it's positioned because people don't like to be sold. People like to buy, people don't like to be sold. And then going back into the 80s, when we had this huge run up in the market, there was a real turmoil for insurance because insurance doesn't show the kind of returns that the market shows, right? And so there was this whole, I'd say, rejig of the insurance market that entered this new product called the Universal Life Insurance, which combines investments with an insurance chassis. And that's really confused things for people too, having that other tool out there to really offset against what we call traditional permanent whole life insurance. But when you really get down to the details of permanent life insurance, it's been here for 100 years, it's going to be here for another 100 years. It's very stable. It's like a bond alternative. It is a tremendous planning tool for individuals. And, we'll get into a few more things down the road around that. But it's the stability of permanent insurance and how it's actuarially determined and how it's got tax advantages that make it a very, very important part of everybody's financial tool belt.
Is it true that people can put money into their insurance and borrow against it?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Now, that does come with a few wrinkles. Borrowing against your life insurance contract is a contractual feature on a lot of permanent products. Having said that, though, it's kind of like having a home equity line against your house. If you're using it towards accumulating more assets and growing your wealth is one thing. If you're using it to go on vacation and things like that, that's another thing, right? Now, there are some strategies out there that we won't go too far into that talk about taking loans and paying those loans back, and there is some substance around that. But that's a really big conversation. But yes, the contractual provisions of, most permanent contracts allow you to borrow funds from the contract.
So how does this permanent insurance fit into the narrative tools technical framework that you mentioned?
Yeah, so it's a tool. Insurance is a tool. Now, the way I like to position insurance is this. We got the protection phase, we have the growth phase, and we have the legacy phase in wealth accumulation. So protection is easy. It means, how are we going to protect your greatest asset, which is your ability to make money? So for instance, if somebody makes $100,000 a year, over the span of 20 to 30 years, they're going to make, without inflation, without pay raises, they're going to make between $2 to $3 million. If your family is sitting there relying on you to have that income so that they can live their lives, you can send the kids to school, you can buy a second car and those kind of things. That's huge for a young family. So that's the protection phase. And usually the tool that we use is term life insurance. In the growth phase that's when people are actually growing their money, they're actually developing some assets. And this is at the time where there's some narratives out there called, buy term, invest the difference. There might be shifting more of their assets towards investments in a traditional sense than insurance. And again, there's a lot around that conversation. We think that that should be more balanced than it traditionally is, but that's the growth phase. In the legacy phase, it just means that if you have more money than you need to live on, you actually have freedom of money, then everything in excess is going to waterfall to the next generation, which is legacy. Now, from a purely tax perspective and using actuarial science, it's really hard for an investment product to beat insurance over time in that area, which is the legacy area, right? And with the stability and with less volatility. So that's how we talk about life insurance.
As we're wrapping up, if someone is still with us through all this conversation and they want to take control of their finances, where do they start?
The first thing to do is to say, hey, I want to do this and take action. Then I think you need to contact a number of advisors. And then you have to have a set of questions to ask those advisors, and I think you should interview them. You should also ask people in your network as well, but you don't have to know the answers to the questions, you just have to answer the questions. And we have something that's uniquely human that will allow us to know when a person is right for us, okay? Because we have that kind of BS meter, they like to call it, ingrained in all of us. Then you also need to check their qualifications to make sure that they have what they have and actually build a team. This whole process is described in our book, Financial Blind Spots, Insider Secrets to Discovering Financial Freedom. But that's what people should do, is go out and interview somebody, pick someone, and then start building a team.